Rebecca and I got into studying it, because there was a lot I didn't know. And when I studied a little bit about my cousin from Hastings, Rebecca went out to, what's it called? Ancestry.com, and by gosh, she found this information on James Daley, that he perished, and the dates that he perished from the United States government. So I thought that was kind of interesting. And I'm also going to now ask, how many folks, if you just raise your hand, have had people who you have lost through the war? So I've got Marie, Joyce, Barbara, okay. And then how many of you through a war? And then how many of you have served? Paula was an Air Force. Jim was, what were you, Jim? Navy pilot. Flew the jets off the big thing. What about you, Mike?
Naval Air.
Naval Air. Well, how about that? Fabulous. I would have liked to join the service, but I don't like to get up early. But I really admire the service. So let me stand over here now. I'm sorry for jumping around. I'm going to stand here now and pull up my talk. So again, welcome. Mimi, as always, thank you for your wonderful opening. Marie is a professional musician, and we are very blessed to have her. She's also on our board and does a lot of work on the board. I know. All right. I've got some electromagnetic field. Every time I put this thing on, it wants to stop. Green.
Batteries.
Okay, here we go. Must be all the metal that's in my body. Okay, so most of you know my favorite book, so let me just start with this because I always have to give a plug for it. This is when I learned New Thought. I learned New Thought in the 70s. I bought this book, as I've told many of you. I bought this book. It's not working. I bought this book in 1978, and I've kept it. It's all rat and tattered. But you can buy a new version on Amazon, and it looks like this. But you can't have the jeans. It's called As a Man Thinketh. It's just a great little, easy book to read to understand what our philosophy is. So I'm going to read one paragraph, a little bit about our philosophy. And it's about mind. It's about how we create things with our mind. As a man's mind may be likened to a garden, which may be intelligently cultivated or allowed to run wild, but whether cultivated or neglected, it must and will bring forth. If no useful seeds are put into it, then an abundance of useless seeds will fall, and they will continue of their kind. And then he goes on to say, a man sooner or later discovers that he is the master gardener of his soul and the director of his life. I think a terrific little book. So I always want to give a plug for that book. And now, let me open up. Thank you so much, Garnet. I don't know what I do. Thank you so much.
Dee, who's the author of that little book?
That book, by the way, was written in the late 1800s. It was printed in 1903. The man's name is James Allen. Okay. My talk today is to honor Memorial Day. And the title is, Freedom is Not Free. For many of us, Memorial Day signals parties, vacations, going to the beach, Indy 500, and having a great time with our friends and family, and a long weekend. And there's certainly nothing unpatriotic about that. And I'm always the one who lead the meetings and have fun and have the parties. But today is a day to reflect and to think about what is the real meaning of Memorial Day. So I'm going to start my talk with an affirmation that I know is our intention. And it's an intention of peace, as Mimi always referred to. You'll know this song. I will not sing it because I cannot sing. But it's John Lennon's song, Imagine. Imagine there's no countries. It isn't hard to do. Nothing to kill or die for, and no religion to. Imagine all the people living life in peace. You may say I'm a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I hope someday you'll join us as we all know today, and certainly in the past, the world has not been as one. And as the Daily Word that Mimi read from, Daily Word is the Unity pamphlet that comes out, we have copies here. As she read, I do not have to agree with the premise of war to understand the sacrifices of the souls have made. That's from the Daily Word. These men and women were strong and vibrant. They loved and were loved, and they are missed. When I signed up to give the talk, as I mentioned, I really didn't know too much about it. The original purpose of it, as Marie mentioned, was after the Civil War. The Civil War was so devastating to our country. Almost 750,000 people on both sides perished. And as a result, all these small towns, if you visited any of these war, we've been to Gettysburg, we've been to Antietam, you realize they're just beautiful little towns out in the middle of a bucolic countryside. And can you imagine the days after the war, 55,000 killed in Gettysburg, 22,000, I think, killed in one day in Antietam. Those communities were devastated. So when the war was finally over, they started decorating the graves, and they started putting flowers. And also, after the war, I didn't know this, was the first national cemeteries. There were so many people perished. They built the national cemeteries. Today we have 157 national cemeteries. My dad, the U.S. captain, retired, as I said, from World War II, and he and my mom are buried in a national cemetery in St. Louis. The first recorded Memorial Day, or they didn't even call it Memorial Day, they probably called it Declaration Day, was U.S. President Grant presided over a Memorial Day ceremony in Arlington in 1968. And then of course, we had World War I, which was very devastating. So after World War I, they started to be calling this Declaration Day Memorial Day. More than 1.2 million Americans, men and women, have perished as a result of military conflicts. Because of them and the millions who have served, we are able to live in our free society. Again, my title today is Freedom is Not Free. We honor those who gave what Abe Lincoln said in the Gettysburg Address, where, as I mentioned, 55,000 soldiers died. He says, their last measure of devotion in the fight for our liberty. That was Abraham Lincoln's famous quote from the Gettysburg Address. So I say, who knows what these men and women who have perished could have attained? We'll never know what was lost, but without a doubt, many were destined to have a major impact on our lives and our society. Their skills and their knowledge and their uniqueness and their individuality have been lost to us. We mourn our most recent losses with our families, and we're proud of our ancestors who are now heroes. We recount their contributions, even though we may never have known them. Here's another fact I learned, that in 2000, Congress established a national moment of remembrance, which asks all of us on Memorial Day to pause for 1 minute at 3 p.m. in an act of national unity. So Mimi was asking us to pray at 10, and I'm going to ask us to take a moment at 3. That time, 3 p.m., was chosen because that's when most Americans are enjoying their freedoms. So I believe the purpose of remembering and honoring this day, in addition to giving the thanks and paying homage, is so we the living can strive to do our best lives in the present moment and embrace the possibility of creating a future that is different from the past. So I'm going to repeat that, because I think that's the essence of this unity type of a talk, is the purpose of remembering, in addition to giving thanks, in addition to honoring, is that we strive to live our best lives in the moment, and we embrace the possibility of creating a future that is different from the past, as John Lennon said. And isn't that the true essence of unity? In the late 1880s, Charles and Mildred Fillmore, they are the co-founders of Unity. Again, these were pioneering people. In the 1880s, they were coming up with these thoughts that maybe traditional religion wasn't working. Maybe we should think differently. And Charles, as many of you know, healed himself from a withered leg, and his wife, Myrtle, healed herself of tuberculosis. Charles Fillmore said, "Life is an ever-progressing upward spiral of conscious evolution." And he also said, "When the world understands God to be the source of every need, there will be no war." Love that quote. So Unity believes that God, spirit, energy, truth, whatever we call it, that God is good, God is available, and God is in each of us. We live intentionally in the moment, and we use our minds and our consciousness to make things good for ourselves and for the world. As I mentioned, I'm going to discuss several servicemen and their families. And I'd like to have some time at the end for you to share, formally or informally. And by the way, I want to give a plug. Rebecca, who loves to bake, made some homemade strawberry cake. Thank you, Rebecca. So let's start with James Daley. James and Jack Daley were my second cousins. The Daleys lived in a small New York State village called Hastings-on-the-Hudson. That's where I was born. Both brothers enlisted in World War I, and they served in Europe. Since they were born so many years ahead of me, of course I did not know them. But I knew their story because my Aunt Marie would share this story, and I've learned this story as a young person. This is my story from Aunt Marie. After 4 years of bloody conflict, Germany surrendered, and the Great War, World War I, was at an end. They named the day Armistice Day. Armistice means ceasefire. The end of the fighting was documented to take effect at 11 o'clock in the morning on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. So the 11th hour, the 11th day of the 11th month. So that would have been, of course, November 11th, 1918. We now celebrate that date as Veterans Day. My Aunt Marie was 10 years old, and she told me she remembered Armistice Day like it was yesterday. All the bells in the small town of Hastings were ringing, and everybody was celebrating. Our boys will be home, our boys will be home. On that jubilant day, her Aunt Mary came running out of the house to her sister's home, who was my grandmother, and she was saying, "Oh my gosh, I can't wait, my sons will be home." Tragically, the day after the armistice was signed, my great Aunt Mary, received a telegram from the War Department informing her that James had died November 5th, 6 days before the ceasefire. Private James Daley had enlisted in October 1917. We learned this from our Ancestry.com. He was sent to Europe in April of 1918, and he died November 5th. He was 25 years old. Since he was the first casualty in this very small town, they have named the VFW post the James W. VFW post. So I grew up always seeing that. The Daley family relied on their Catholic faith to get them through coping with that. World War I claimed 116,516 American lives. Private James Daley was one of them. Freedom is not free. My second story of courage is that of Army Specialist Ryan C. King, and we're honored to have his family here with us today. Ryan was assigned to the Special Troops Battalion, 3rd Brigade Combat Team, 1st Infantry Division, Fort Hood, Texas. Serving during Operation Enduring Freedom, his unit in Afghanistan was attacked by insurgents, and Ryan died immediately on May 1, 2009. Ryan originally had served 3+ years in Korea, and he was in his 11th month in Afghanistan. Just like my second cousin, Ryan, timing did not work in his favor. Ryan was 28 days from coming home. He had re-enlisted and was returning to Fort Hood, Texas for a career in the Army with his wife, Sergeant Rachel King, whom he met while serving in Korea. Ironically, Ryan, who always wanted to be a soldier, was born on November 11th, Armistice Day. And his mother tells us that he was born on the 11th hour of Armistice Day. Ryan King was 22 years old when he died, alongside 2 other young men fighting for our nation. And I knew Ryan since he was about 12, because I've known his family for so long. We've watched Ryan's family and his younger brothers, Dante, who's with us today, and his other brother, Tyler, courageously cope. So in putting together this talk, I asked his mother, Candy, some questions. And I said, you know, how have you coped, and what can you share? So I'm going to read this. This is from my friend Candy. I found strength through the support system that has formed around us, even without knowing it was there. At St. Mark's Episcopal Church in Atlanta, I listened to our pastor talk about the hardship of his son since returning from Iraq and the struggles of PTSD. I heard the change in Ryan as he served in Afghanistan. I heard the fear in his voice about coming home and learning to live a new kind of life after war. Fortunately, we had a family friend, Callie. She had just returned from a year in Cuba, and her new assignment was with the Georgia National Guard as head of casualty assistance. She led us through every decision, every question, and was there for us at every level. The members of the congregation gathered around us and comforted us with kindness and love. We have found letters and writings from Ryan over the years where he talks about how he wanted to live his life, and he was doing just that. He believed in what he was doing, and he knew it was his calling. What else would you do when you are born on the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month? I feel him all around me. I see him in everyday things. I believe I will see him again someday. Yes, I miss him every day, but I love the man he was and his determination to do what he believed in his heart. Our country remembers Ryan as a man of the highest character, and his many medals of accommodation are a testament to this. His family remembers Ryan as, and I love this, because in honor of Ryan, the families frequently having events and trying to educate the younger generation about our heroes. And on the back, it's freedom is not free, and on the back, it's a little bit about Ryan. We know him as a loving husband. We know him as a wonderful son. We know him as an awesome big brother. We know him as a great-grandson. We know him as a perfect nephew. We know him as a mischievous cousin, a soldier and friend, always loved and never forgotten. Quite beautiful. So I think this brings me back to the fortitude of our families and the coping and the strength that you have. One final story about a gentleman who gave his life, he was a Marine. His father was the highest ranking Marine in the country. His father was a general, General Kelly. And General Kelly's son surprised the family and joined the military after he graduated from college in Florida. He served several years. He started as an enlisted man, and then he moved up through the ranks, and he became an officer. He lost his life as well in Afghanistan. He was 29 years old. He died when he stepped on a landmine while leading a platoon of Marines. Since his father was so well known, if you think about it, I even remember seeing him doing Pentagon briefings. National Public Radio interviewed him, and National Public Radio said to his father, "General, was it worth it?" And I'm going to read what the father said. Father said, "I think what I tell families now is that the only person really that has the right to answer that question, was it worth it, is the young man or woman who lost their lives. And I believe they would say that if they were doing what they wanted to do, they were where they wanted to be. So that's the answer, I think, to that question. It's not for us that survived to answer it. I think it's for those young people to answer it. And I think they do answer it with their actions and obviously their lives." End of quote. So as I'm wrapping up today, I propose not asking the question, was it worth it? I propose we ask and commit to ourselves, how do we make it worth it? And how do we make it worth it in our faith? Number one, we continue to remember. I mean, there's a plaque in a national cemetery that reads, "Only if you forget me will I have died in vain." We express thanks to the military people that are here today in our lives. Number two, as I mentioned earlier, we strive to live intentionally in the moment and to use our minds, our consciousness, to live a better life. That's what our teaching's about. We are here to live a better life. Buddha says the secret of health for both body, mind and body is to live in the present moment, wisely and earnestly. Committing to living our best lives wisely and earnestly is a responsibility we all have, regardless of our tragedies. It takes mental stamina to practice this teaching. We strive to live our best lives with ardor, with vitality, with authority, just as these brave soldiers committed to their military time. And finally, I suggest how we make it worth it is to remember the power in meditation and affirmative prayer. Mimi's always teaching us that our prayers here impact the whole world. It's a gift she's always reminding us of, because we're all connected. So in closing, I know at 3 o'clock on this Memorial Day, I enjoy my barbecue and cold beer, I will remember the blessings and the freedoms of this nation, and I'll take a moment during this national moment of remembrance, and I will reflect to say a prayer of thanks to Private James Daley, Specialist Ryan King, and 2nd Lieutenant Robert Michael Kelly, and to all of those who, in Abe Lincoln's words, gave the last full measure of devotion in the fight for our liberty. And so it is. I think we should do our peace song, because that would be highly appropriate. I put some copies around. If you want to stand up and just hold your hands, we'll do that.